everyone, I'd like to introduce you to our special guest tonight, Dr. Louis Forline. And so if you'll take it from here, Louis, then we are ready.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Okay, thanks for showing up. Okay, this is great to have such a nice audience here in these difficult times. I know everybody is definitely having to shuffle their feet and adapt to the situation we're living in now, but hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel. Yours truly got vaccinated a couple of weeks ago, my first dose of Pfizer, and I'm slated to get my second dose on the 20th. So let's see, okay, how we'll all go through this situation here. And then I'll be talking a little bit about this too, because as we're discussing the Amazon and everything, that's a place that's also being assailed by, COVID and so forth. But thank you so much, Diane, for this invitation. Thanks, Joseph, for introducing us. And thanks, Adine and Diane, and her helpers, Rebecca too, for doing all the heavy lifting and getting us ready. We did a dry run a few weeks ago, I believe, right? And so it worked, and yours truly is still learning a little bit about Zoom here. So we're all doomed to Zoom at this day and age, but we seem to be adapting, right? So anyway, let me start sharing the screen here and going through, my talk here. And at the end of the talk, I'd be glad to answer any questions that you all may have. Okay, it's a really fascinating region of the world. It's got wonderful people there, and we're learning lots and lots and lots about it as each day goes by. And particularly at this day and age, it's an area that concerns us a lot because of policies, the political economy of the region, the things that are going on in the world today too, how global forces like that impinge on the Amazon as well. So let me start sharing my screen here with you all, okay? Okie dokie. And let me see if I can start here with this. Okay, and then I always have to remove myself right there. Make sure everybody gets a good chance to see everything here. So I'm going to be talking about the persistence and cultural transformation of the Awa, the people I've been working with in the Amazon, on the eastern fringes of the Amazon since 1990. Okay, my first opportunity to meet them was engaging with a colleague of mine by the name of William Belay. He was a visiting professor at the University of Florida, and he invited me to go on down and meet the Awa. He doesn't work with the Awa, he works with a neighboring group of theirs called the Kapo. And nobody had done any studies on the Awa, save for a linguist who unfortunately only got to spend 6 weeks with them and caught malaria and had to leave. So there wasn't much of a paper trail to follow, and I had to learn their language, from scratch, no classroom, preparation ahead of time like that. So there was plenty to do, after I had my first initial introduction to them back in 1990, but it was a very nice introduction, a very pleasant experience, spending 2 months with them. And then I returned to the US and started concentrating my efforts in getting funding and so forth to return. And I started, my work in earnest back in 1992. And so I spent 2 years living directly there with them, rarely leaving the field and engaging with them on a day-to-day basis, things that, we anthropologists call participant observation or ethnography, learning the language, establishing rapport, and engaging with, the goings on every day so that, I definitely dive headlong into their culture. It was challenging, actually, because it's a new situation, and they had just gone through some very difficult times. And their first days of contact, which I'll show you in a minute, because a lot of them, succumb to introduced diseases, mostly malaria and influenza. But they are a very hardy people, and they rebounded very well, which I'll be talking about also later. But let me move on here and just give you all a general idea of the Amazon, because it's an enormous region, right? And as you can see in the map right here, we have just the Brazilian Amazon alone on the left-hand side, you can see here, is bigger than Western Europe, right? And it is an area that has many different, indigenous groups, from various linguistic families here, from Arawak, Carib, Jé, Pano, Tucano, and Tupi. And the folks that I work with, the Awa, which live here in this region, they belong to a subgroup of this language family right there called Tupi. If you want to have an idea of how much pertains to, say, Brazil, properly speaking, it's about 62% right there. There's about 9 different countries to be exact, that envelop the Amazon region, as you can see. And some people actually would say that you could stretch it even down to some of the northern fringes here of Paraguay, for example. But it has many different ecological zones. It has many different peoples speaking languages that are diverse and different, as Chinese is to Russian, for example, right? So when you think of the Amazon, you can't just think of it in this monolithic block, this generic idea of the Amazon, properly speaking. So let me show you here, for example, in this slide, right, just the different ecological zones, for example, that we have. Sorry about that we have in the Amazon. So what comes to mind first is naturally what we call the terra firme, right, in Portuguese. It's this with the firm land, if you will. It's this big green mat. When you fly over the Amazon, this goes as far as the eye can see. But there are also these other ecological zones too, which are very interesting, and people have lived in since time immemorial, like the Cerrados, which will remind you more of, for example, a woodland savanna area that you see in Africa, right? And this is something that you see more kind of like in central Brazil, right? And transitioning down, from like this forest right here to this wide open area. And here is an aerial photo of 2 rivers meeting. This is the Rio Negro, Rio Negro, like we say in Portuguese, and this is the Rio Solimões, the Solimões River, meeting at the town of Manaus, which you've probably heard about in the news lately, which is a town that's really been struck a lot by COVID, right? But these 2 rivers meet, and they form the Amazon, properly speaking, from this point onwards, going eastwards and flowing into the Atlantic Ocean, right? So the Rio Negro or Blackwater ecosystems are also known as what we call rivers of hunger, right? Because they're more acidic. So the vegetation which surrounds that particular area right there, is a little bit more stunted, and the biological productivity isn't as high, right? But if you compare it to a temperate ecological zone like where we live here, in the temperate global north, it is still more productive, than the ecosystems we have here. So this is just a relative question when we say they are rivers of hunger, right? So we have this, for example, this river right here is a very productive river, the Solimões, and when they join together, the Amazon and its tributaries, it's the biggest hydrographic basin in the world, right? Rivers running from north to south into the Amazon, and tributaries running, from south to north into it as well. Here's another, distinct ecological zone that we call Igapós. In Portuguese, it comes from a Tupian word, right? These are seasonally flooded forests, at the peak of the rainy season. And in this area where I work, the rainy season usually starts in January and goes all the way up to June, and then you have a dry season, not meaning that it doesn't rain, but the rain is a lot less frequent then. Right? So we like to think of the Amazon generally is like what we call a rainforest, but we also have what we call seasonally dry tropical forests, right, which are very productive for people who, for example, practice what we call swidden or slash and burn agriculture. Right? So moving on. We also have many anthropogenic landscapes, right? These are areas that are created in the wake of activities by indigenous peoples in the past, and currently by many of the traditional peasant communities, which are mixed blood communities that came in the wake of colonization of the region. Okay, and people blended, right, and created, okay, new communities in their own right. Okay, Brazil's always been known for its miscegenation, like we say. Okay, it's probably the most racially mixed society in the world, right? And they're very ambiguous about the whole thing. This is something I've written about a lot, and it's a very interesting subject when you look at how Brazil is constructed, okay, many of these communities. But many of these areas right here that you see have been created by many indigenous folks in the past, and they've created kind of new ecological zones in their own right. And here what we're looking at is a patch of palm forest, okay, from the babaçu palm, okay, that's the scientific name right there, Athalia speciosa. And in the eastern region of the Amazon, this is an ecological zone that stretches as far as the eye can see, and it's very productive. And many of the hunting and gathering groups would, okay, camp out in these particular areas there, because this particular tree, as you can see right there, has many, many, many resources, everything from building materials to things that you can eat, right? And even medicinal properties, right? Other groups too have created, okay, what we call forest islands. Okay, this is a study that was done by Darrell Posey, the late Darrell Posey, okay, who finished his career at Oxford. And he, after many years of working with the Kayapo, saw that distinct ecological zones that many people were very unaware of earlier, even people who studied things like forestry, people in the area of biology and the natural sciences. And these were regions, okay, that were actually created by them just by moving about. People thought that they actually did this unconsciously, but no, there is a definite conscious management, okay, approach to creating these forest islands in the middle of the savanna. Okay, so these spot the transition area between, okay, the forest, properly speaking, and the wide open savanna area. And they're definitely a lot more productive, okay, than the surrounding areas that you see. And oftentimes, okay, in, okay, the areas that have been temporarily abandoned, you find potsherds. So obviously these are areas that have been occupied by these people, okay, from time immemorial. And it's interesting that the Kayapo themselves don't have pottery. This is something that is more common to like the Tupian groups, but once, okay, they camped out there and established position, okay, they enhanced, okay, these forest islands, properly speaking, they call in their language apete, right? So with that said, let's talk about the people of the Amazon, okay? We've talked a little bit about the environment, okay? This is an area that, okay, when Europeans arrived, okay, had probably anywhere between 5 and 6 million people. There's no evidence of what we would call like estate level societies. Most of them were foraging groups or village and band societies that keep practicing horticulture, right? And today, okay, we have in Brazil roughly about 830,000 indigenous peoples. Okay, it's not in indigenous countries like, for example, you see in Bolivia or Peru, okay, where population is mostly, okay, indigenous, or has a large expressive indigenous population. We're speaking about less than 1% of the population, but because it's so much miscegenation, okay, if people actually went and studied their own DNA, they'd find out that they have a lot of Indian blood in them, right? And okay, these are some folks that I've worked with. Okay, I've worked with 9 different indigenous communities in the Amazon. Right here, we're looking at the Surini. Okay, they live on the Xingu River, one of the tributaries of the Amazon. So they're settled horticulturalists, and they make pottery. And these are the folks that I work with. Okay, the Awa for the last 3 days. Excuse me. They were hunter-gatherers, okay, until recently, and then they transitioned into mixed subsistence strategy, but we suspect that they actually could have been horticulturalists in the past, but because of the fact that many, the encroaching frontiers since the colonial day and age, okay, pushed many of the indigenous peoples, okay, into different areas, and forcing them, okay, to shift their subsistence strategies, right? So speaking of the mixed blood communities that I was talking about earlier, okay, we have, for example, okay, what we call caboclos in Portuguese. Comes from a Tupian word, right, which means ca, okay, coming from the forest, right? Capó, as a matter of fact, is one of the neighboring groups out here, which I mentioned earlier to the Awa, which means footprints in the forest, right? And here, okay, we have a couple that, this is a man who moved into the Amazon region. He was from the Brazilian Northeast. This was during the war effort in World War II when they had what they called the second rubber boom. Right? And so they're conscripting what they called rubber soldiers to tap rubber, okay, from the trees for the Allied war effort. He went there, okay, when he was a teenager. I think he actually wasn't even quite a teenager yet. And he met this lady here. And they married, okay, and well, they had 24 children, okay. So this is a day and age when people were definitely blending and mixing and creating new communities, all in that big, large river network in the Amazon region. Right? So there's so much that we're learning, okay, as we speak right now, and it's a region that's not densely populated, right, but it's growing because of the big moving frontier. Brazil wants to be up there and running, okay, with like first world nations and so forth. And so it definitely wants to establish position and establish more sovereignty in the region, right? So you have many projects going on in the region, which are definitely impacting these people here that we see in this picture, everything from mining projects, which are impacting the Awa, to hydroelectric projects, okay, which have dammed up rivers, okay, road building too, which is encroaching on them, which I'll definitely address, okay, as we move on. But let me show you where the Awa live, okay. I showed you a map of Brazil and the Amazon. They live right here from the inset. We blow it up in this region right here in the eastern Amazon. And this kind of straddles an area that we call both the Brazilian Northeast and the Amazon, properly speaking. And being, okay, the eastern fringe of the Amazon means, okay, that it is, okay, kind of transitioning into another area which receives a lot less rainfall, and there are a lot more people there. So the Awa, they live, okay, and this is a block of reservations, right, coupled, okay, with a biological reserve here. So they live in this area right here, what they call the Alto Turiaçu Indigenous Reservation, right here, the Awa, land that's set aside for themselves, as well as in this region right here. And then there are many other groups, okay, families who have not come into contact with mainstream society. They've avoided contact altogether, right? So all told, we're speaking of a population of about 520 people, but then we don't know how many people are out there in the forest who are avoiding contact. But when you bring all of these reservations together here, it's a really hefty size of land. It's almost, I'd say, size of the state of Connecticut, over 1.5 million hectares. Okay, I'm thinking in metrics right now. I can't think back into the English system, but it's a really good sizable area of land. But as you can see, there's lots of deforestation going on around here, which is compromising many of the livelihoods of the people living in this region too. And then there's a big mining project right next to them, which runs right along the southern fringes right here of this reservation right there, which I'll talk about in a minute, from the Carajás mining project, right, which impacts roughly 40 indigenous communities in the Amazon. Right? This is also an area, okay, that has a lot of biological endemism. Sorry, this is in Portuguese. I could have put this in English right here, but biological endemism means that, okay, these are species that are unique to this area, right? So these are sometimes very sensitive species, and that's why we need biological reserves sometimes to protect certain areas that have species that are unique to them. And there are lots of different endemic areas in Brazil right there. This is one of them. So this is an area that's been targeted by many, okay, conservation groups to make a bigger argument, okay, to even preserve them that much more. And we like to make a distinction here between conservation and preservation, right? Preservation is usually a hands-off policy, okay, where you leave things alone. Sometimes you don't even want people in an area because the species are so sensitive, right? Conservation means, okay, you can actually use the resources as long as you're using it in a sustainable way. And right now, as we speak, okay, we're debating plenty, okay, this whole idea of sustainability. What does sustainability mean? And what does forest management mean? And again, this area right here, as you can see, is probably the last holdout right there in the eastern fringe of the Amazon for intact forests right there. It's all surrounded, okay, by settlement, okay, and projects, lots of deforestation going on around there. And this evidently can compromise, okay, the exchange of species and the reproduction of species in this particular area, okay, if you create a biological desert around it. So later on, I'll be telling you about a project that we're currently working on to create a buffer zone for the people living in this area here, plus this biological reserve, okay, it's called the Gurupi Biological Reserve. The regional development is encroaching upon them, like I was mentioning earlier. Okay, this is a small inset here is a map of the railway which runs right by one of the reservations, the Kadu Reservation, which I mentioned to you earlier. And this is about 500 miles long. Okay, there's an enormous mining range in the adjacent state of Pará. Okay, and this promises minerals. Okay, for Brazil to export, okay, to other countries for something like the next 150 years. And it's been a big breadwinner for Brazil, and many countries have definitely scored deals with the Brazilian government to export, okay, particularly pig iron, okay, from this particular region. And so as a result of this, you have lots of artisanal smelters in the region, okay, to make charcoal, okay, for the production of pig iron. And this is the train right here, which runs, okay, up and down this railroad, which impacts many of the indigenous communities in this area. So there's both, okay, a cargo or freight train, which runs almost like 24/7, okay, extracting minerals, okay, there from the mining range, taking them, okay, to the port town of São Luís, and then exporting them to many countries. China is Brazil's biggest customer right now, so China and Japan, okay, they are definitely interested, okay, in what we have in the Amazon, okay. And then there's also, okay, passenger train, okay, this company, you may have heard about this company in the news, is called Vale, V-A-L-E, okay, and it's been kind of like one of the big behemoths, okay, in the world scenario in terms of some of the destruction it's been doing on the tropical forest. And it's been considered a big villain by many conservation groups. But what's written into their contract there is a stipulation in the contract that they have to provide goods and services for all the people that have been impacted, okay, in this region here, adjacent to the railway. That is both the indigenous peoples and, okay, the small hamlets, okay, and peasant communities that live there. So they have to provide passenger train service too, and that's often how I get to one of the villages, okay, to visit the Awa. So there's some other big players too of agribusiness. It's about 30% of Brazil's GDP, okay, and it's advancing full throttle in the Amazon region for export to other countries, and it's kind of encroaching on the southern fringes of where the Awa live, right? So the whole question of cattle in Brazil is a big, big issue. You have more livestock in Brazil than you have people, right? And they call it o país do boi, right? Okay, the country of cattle, right? And this is a lot for export, okay, to other countries right now. And now that we're going through COVID, as a matter of fact, we found out, okay, there's more vaccinations available, okay, for cattle than there are for people, which is really an alarming thing, especially now that we need, okay, to distribute vaccinations, okay, throughout the country. And it's become such a big industry that even here in the US, many Brazilian scholars are beating out American scholars in research or teaching jobs in this area, everything from meat science to rangeland management, animal feed, right? And once Brazil was always thought, you know, as the country of soccer? Well, wouldn't you know, okay, the Brazilian Cowboys are actually winning more rodeo championships than most people. Over at the Lawler Event Center a few years back, as a matter of fact, okay, they cleared the whole area right there, okay, for a bull riding championship. And of 30 cowboys, okay, that were competing, okay, for the prize, almost half of them were Brazilian. I think like 12 to be exact. Okay, and most of them, okay, from this area that's growing all this stuff right here that you see in the picture. Okay, mainly soybeans, right? Anyway, so let me give you a brief little background about the Awa. Okay, their name, okay, is a Tupi Guarani name, which means man, person, or people. But in the literature, they more refer to as Guajá, which is a Portuguese corruption of their name, Guajá, right? So again, it's from the Tupi Guarani linguistic family. And we think they could have been horticulturalists in the past, okay? And so it's the linguistic evidence indirectly indicates this to us because they're familiar with crops, right? So how could they be familiar with crops? Okay, so what they could have been is like a satellite group kind of hovering around, okay, the more settled indigenous groups in the region, occasionally, you know, making a raid on their field, absconding with their crops, retreating to the forest, or they could have had kind of like a temporary, okay, job relationship with these folks where they come in and work for them and then retreat to the forest. But they were familiar with the crops, except that they weren't the kind of people who like to sit down, plant them, weed their gardens and so forth, and mind, okay, their agricultural plots 24/7. That's what the settled groups do, right? But okay, this may have been a big mix, okay, in the past, right? But now that they've come into contact, they've been settled onto these reservations, okay, they've shifted over to horticulture. And we have to make a distinction here between horticulture and agriculture, because when you talk agriculture, you're talking about permanent settlements, okay, permanently planting, okay, in a particular plot. Whereas in horticulture, okay, what you do is you plant, okay, for a number of cycles, okay, and then you leave that land fallow, and then you move on, okay, to another area and plant there. So the permanent contact with mainstream society was in 1973, and since then, they've been settled into 5 different semi-nucleated settlements. And again, there are about 520 people now as we speak, right? But there's more of them in the forest who simply avoid contact altogether. Right? This is part of the research team I work with and people that I've actually cultivated through the years. Okay, here's Huira Garcia from the University of São Paulo. This is Marina Magalhães. She's from the University of Brasilia. She's a linguist. Okay, we published together on the Awa language, which is really a fascinating language. It's the gender-free language. And here we visited one of the communities. Marina's interviewing, okay, one of the men who came into contact, okay, back in the early 70s there, okay, when he was a kid, right? So jumping scales, again, like I said, they're transitioning into agriculture, okay, horticulture. So here you can look at the cycle of how Sweden agriculture works, where people, okay, they clear the underbrush first, okay, they let that dry, then they chop down the trees, they let all the slash dry, and towards the end of the dry season, okay, then they apply a burn, okay, to the field. They may apply 2 or 3 burns just to make sure that all the ash settles into the soil. And then once the first rains start coming, then they plant, right? So you can see this lady down here, what she's carrying is a bunch of manioc stems, okay? In Spanish, okay, the more common term for manioc is yuca, right? Okay, and this is a crop that's become a big bread and butter crop throughout the world since the day and age of colonization. The Portuguese took it over to Africa, and in Africa, it's more commonly known as cassava. And this is where, okay, your tapioca pudding comes from, as a matter of fact. And if you go into some of the ethnic food stores here, supermarkets in town, you can actually buy manioc or yuca, but there's 2 kinds, right? There's what they call the bitter kind that needs to go through all this processing, okay, to extract, okay, the prussic acid out of it because it's poisonous. But then you make this flour, which is a really big bread and butter thing, okay, for many of the indigenous groups. But then there's the sweet kind, they call it. It's not that it's not necessarily sweet, but that's what they call it, right? It's but something you can just basically cook, like French fries. You can boil it, and it definitely is a hefty meal. So right here, what you see is an intercropped field, okay, of corn and manioc, okay. Here's the corn stems right there, okay. And this is about 1 hectare. It's about 2.4 acres, this particular field right here. This is one of the Indian agents, okay, show me the field that they planted with the awa, right? And this is something that they've really learned to fall back on a lot because they still like to hunt. There's plenty of hunting going on with them, but this is something that definitely enhances food security and food sovereignty. And in this field here, they planted both, okay, the bitter and the sweet kind of manioc right there, right? And this style of management, okay, this, like the horticulture I mentioned to you, they say often, okay, people have written plenty about Swidden agriculture, that the Swidden kind of apes the rainforest, if you will, in both structure and function. So when it goes through the process of succession and goes back to like a climax forest like we see here in the background, it has all this diversity into it, right? That's worked in. But it definitely needs, okay, that fallow period to be able to work back, okay, to regenerate to a climax forest. Right? But these fields here, okay, in the process of making them, definitely enhances a lot of the biological diversity we see in the region. So indigenous management is something that people are taking very seriously at this day and age. Right? If we look at what's going on today, okay, with the awa, we see that they have shifted their diet strategies very much so, to the point where you see almost 60% of, okay, their diet comes from their crops, right? 18% still hunting. Now that they've settled near rivers, about 5%, okay, comes from fishing, okay? And then gathering products in the forest too, okay? Everything from honey to bird eggs, if you will, right? And so you can see this has been quite a quick change, okay? In a period of about 20 years, okay, they've shifted over to this particular mode of subsistence where they farm, okay, they hunt, they fish, and they gather, right? But hunting, okay, still occupies most of the time because they're really not farmers. They're not like the settled groups who like to mine their crops, like I said, 24/7. But still, take a look at this. This is quite a dramatic change when you come to take a look how quickly this happened, right? So if we break it down, this is a comparison between 3 villages when I started working with them. Now there's 5 settled communities, as I'd mentioned earlier, but if you look at the contributions, okay, from each different village right there, you can see they vary a little bit, but you can still see that farming right there is the big bread and butter, okay, part of their meal, right? Okay, fishing only has this little sliver right here, as you can see, the simple fact that they live on smaller rivers, okay, and then this is a very seasonal thing, right? Okay, because during the rainy season in the Amazon, what happens is the rivers swell up a lot and it really scatters the schools of fish. So it becomes a lot harder to fish, okay? But when you have, okay, what we have here in this situation here, when the rivers kind of shrink down, the fishing is very, very, very good, right? And so it's adds a little bit more, okay, protein to their diet. But as I mentioned to you earlier, okay, hunting still occupies, okay, a large part of their activities. Right here, this is a hunting retreat, a hunting camp where they go to quite often. They actually leave the village and sometimes spend anywhere from 2 weeks to a month out in the forest where there's plenty more game animals, okay, for them to hunt. Right? And you can see this gentleman right here. He killed a caiman, okay, which he's carrying on his back right there. And this is a famous Awa individual. His name is Karapiru, which means hawk in his language. And his story is very much like the Ishi story, okay, of the Yaqui, okay, people from California. He was isolated for a long time because his family was ambushed back in late 1970s, right? Late 1970s. So he had to live in the forest all by himself for 10 years. And then he was located about 400 miles south, 10 years later, okay, when he approached, okay, a construction crew working on a road building project there, and then the Indian Service didn't know where he came from. They tried to identify which tribe he belonged to, and he had been separated from his son 10 years earlier, okay, 1978, right? And of all people, who did they call on, okay, to meet with him to see if they could identify where he came from? It was his son. Since then, he'd grown into an adult, and they identified each other right there as a real emotional re-encounter that they had right there. But the interesting thing is that many of the groups in the Amazon, they use long bows and long arrows. Okay, they're better for accuracy. It reminds you of kind of like the British longbows. You know, the British were always known for their good archery and that. But yeah, long bows and long arrows are better. Okay, the short and stout bows are more for distance like that. Anyway, let's ask ourselves a question we've always asked this as anthropologists, and we ask if do looks and technology change indigeneity now that they have come into contact or being assimilated and changing a lot. So we're asking, okay, well, this is the same tribe. This fellow right here is this young man's nephew. And you can see the hairstyle there. He liked my sunglasses. I gave them to him, and he took a selfie right there. Right. And many of them are using, okay, the technology we have right now. And Vale, the mining company, by its obligation, its social obligation, since they've impacted these people, have to give them a lot of technology, and they've actually installed internet connections for them there, and have been given them computers and iPhones. So we can talk regularly with each other, okay, on a weekly basis. Right? The internet connection is a little spotty, right? But at least, okay, we're in contact, and they're not hostage, okay, to things that are happening, okay, in their area where they can't communicate with us or with authorities about land invasions and like that. What this gentleman right here is doing, okay, I showed you, okay, a picture of that palm, the Babasu palm earlier, right? And so from the palm fronds right there, okay, what he did is he wove a little backpack here, okay, makeshift backpack, and he took some tree bark right there to make the straps. And inside the backpack here, what he has is manioc, okay, manioc tubers that he pulled out of the ground. They were ripe and ready, okay, take out. So what he's going to do is he's going to dip them in the lake back here and leave them soaking for about 3 days, so he can go through that whole process of making the manioc flour. All right. All right. So with that said, okay, still back to the question, do looks and technology change indigeneity? Okay, is this just a visual change, or is this a total change altogether? So I would say to that, well, not necessarily, but changes in the modes of production and engaging with mainstream society can and will. So that's why what our work is to try to preserve a lot of things like the language. Remember, this is in a language that's a non-literate language. Okay, so we're trying to develop a paper trail where we're doing kind of what way they call Boasian anthropology, an anthropology that was done at the beginning of the 20th century by the founding father of American anthropology, Franz Boas, where we just do descriptive ethnographies. We document everything from cooking recipes to kinship to cosmology and so forth, to make sure, okay, that this is left there for posterity, especially for the younger generation, which is quickly being assimilated. So here you have, okay, cattle on their reservation. This is cattle that, well, they actually confiscated from some people who invaded their area, okay, and they had a big cattle pasture there. Those folks were kicked out, but okay, they had to leave the cattle behind. So there you go, okay. They kept the cattle there from everything from milk, okay, from meat, okay. Horse riding here, and you can see the hairstyle here of this young man, okay, who actually dyed his hair there, okay. And okay, they're riding dirt bikes and everything, and this fellow right here, you see him kind of like dressed in almost like military fatigue right there. He's part of what they call the new group that they formed with other neighboring indigenous group called the Forest Guardians, to patrol their areas regularly, okay, to just be vigilant and make sure that, okay, that people aren't encroaching upon their area and taking their resources. Right? These are sometimes pretty dangerous encounters because these folks that, these poachers that go onto their land are armed, and they're also taking diseases. Okay, they could introduce diseases into the area. Right? Okay, and then, well, as Brazil wants to, in this really rough and heavy-handed manner, settle the Amazon and established all these big, development projects. New players come in on the coattails of that. So right here we have a couple of school teachers, okay, from CIMI. Okay, here are the Awa. Okay, they're right now engaged for over 10 years in this literacy campaign, and they're learning all the subjects. They're getting up to like a 4th, 5th grade education. In CIMI, what this means is, okay, o Conselho Indigenista Missionário, as Brazil's Indigenous Missionary Council. This was a council that was established back in the day of Brazil's military regime, and Italian priests, okay, decided to get together and form a little coalition with other people to argue, okay, and advocate for the rights of indigenous peoples and peasant leagues in the Amazon. And this came on the coattails of a famous Brazilian scholar called Roberto Freire, right, who wrote a lot about, okay, educating, okay, the downtrodden and oppressed. So they're not here, okay, to catechize, okay. Theirs is more like a lay approach to educating indigenous peoples and giving them the wherewithal to be able to engage with mainstream society and advocate for their rights. On the other hand, right here, what we have, okay, is a missionary, okay. He's a Presbyterian missionary, and he's part of what they call ALEM, which means Associação Linguística Evangelical Missionária, okay. It's the Missionary Evangelical Linguistic Association, and they're affiliated with SIL, okay, it's the Summer Institute of Linguistics, which is known, okay, for missionizing many indigenous peoples throughout the world. They're very good linguists, okay, but their main goal, their main aim, okay, is to try to catechize the indigenous people. So this particular teacher right here, okay, he's working in one of the villages. He has a good relationship, okay, with the Indian service, FUNAI, Fundação Nacional do Índio, and he was hired as a school teacher, but at the same time, he's also translating the Bible. As a matter of fact, he did already translate part of the Bible, okay, the Gospel according to Luke, okay, and the Acts of the Apostles, right? Okay, he said that, well, he did that because, well, Luke was easier to translate, right? And so were the Acts of the Apostles, but he is working on other parts of the Bible, and this has created lots of kind of conflict with anthropologists who want to leave indigenous peoples alone in terms of, okay, practicing their own religion. And the Awa, for their part, they practice more of what we call an animistic religion, where everything is imbued with life and spirits. I'll talk about that in a minute. In addition, okay, to the big development projects too, like I mentioned earlier, we also have the poachers, okay, which are making these incursions upon their land right there. So, like I said, sometimes these can be dangerous encounters, and here you have a forest guard right there confiscating a rifle from this young adolescent boy who was hunting there in their area. With his hunting dogs, sometimes they actually confiscate their dogs too and keep everything that they have on them, right, when they kick them out, right? Let me just show you here, okay, some of the consequences of the first days, okay, of contact with mainstream society. And this here is kind of a demographic pyramid, which is not that much of a pyramid. What we usually see in our textbooks and everything is a perfect pyramid. And those of us who study demography know that, well, different populations have different shapes, okay, to their pyramids. But in this particular instance here, okay, this isn't done to convention. It can actually be 0 to 4, okay, 5 to 9, and so forth. Right? But I was using Harvard graphics at the time there. This is the hand that was dealt to me. So, but you can see many gaps, okay, in their demographic, so social structure right there. For the simple fact that many people died in the first days of contact, and for some particular reason, we're not sure why this happened. more women or more females than men died, okay, with these introduced diseases. So we're still writing about this, debating it plenty, why that is, okay. It could be that women are more vulnerable, more fragile, okay, with these introduced diseases when women are pregnant and so forth. And then, of course, since the colonial day and age, what was happening is many women, okay, were absconded, okay, by colonists and so forth, work as domestics, concubines, and so forth since, okay, that day and age. And then conflicts between groups too, okay, definitely contributed to that as well, right? And in the case of the Awa, they were a weaker group if you compare them to their neighboring groups who were in contact with the moving frontier. They had access to firearms and so on. And the Awa always had to live either in the interfluvial zones or in the headwater areas, okay, of the Amazon. So some of the mechanisms that they went through here are polyandrous marriages. Okay, there's a $50 word for you, right? Where one woman is married to two or more men. Sometimes it's fraternal polyandry, right? These can be formal or informal relationships. And then this is something you encounter a lot with many groups in the Amazon, okay, where you have what they call multiple paternity or partible paternity. It's where they have, okay, this reproductive ideology, right? Where the belief that if a woman has relations with two or more men, okay, the child that comes from that union belongs to all the men who've had relations with the women, right? So this is not only with Tupian groups, we see it in many other language families, and this is something we're really fascinated with and still discussing plenty of how that is. And could this take us back to like the precursors of human societies with this whole idea of paternity confusion, which then, as a result, okay, creates more social obligations with the men, okay, to provide more, okay, for the women and children, right? There's also been betrothal, okay, of young women because of these demographic imbalances. And this is something that was written a lot by one of my former advisors, Charles Wagley and Edouard Galvin, okay, where a girl is kind of like promised in marriage to an older man, okay, when she comes of age. So by 8 or 9 years old, her family is already arranging a future marriage, okay, with an adult man. And then also we see that one of the mechanisms that they've used is they have a lot of investment in women and children in this transition period. So women and children have a better nutritional status from the studies that we've done, and then women and children also enjoy more leisure time. So the guys are really stepping up to the plate and, you know, bending over backwards to make sure that everybody is well taken care of. Naturally, many of the men are also put to work, you have to remember, by the Indian Service, okay, or FUNAI, the agency that's charged for administering Indigenous affairs, which corresponds to our Bureau of Indian Affairs here in the US, which has also been plagued with many of its own problems. Let me just show you here, okay, this looks like a little funky slide here, but both polyandry and polygyny can occur at the same time. And anthropologists love kinship, okay, or you think of this as genealogy. It's not to be confused with genealogy. It's actually social structure and organization. Why people, okay, organize in a particular way, why people have certain marriage practices. What is the reproductive ideology, like I was mentioning a minute ago? So we use usually triangles for men, circles for women, equal sign means they're married. But in this line right here at the top, okay, just take a look at that. Okay, you can see that Maihu, she's married, okay, to Chiaming. Over here, okay, we have a polygynous marriage, okay, where Takamonchia is married to both Iname and Ipionchika. Following the arrow of time here downwards, okay, over time, what happened was, well, Iname was starting to relate with Chiaming. So here, in this particular line here, we have both polyandry and polygyny happening at the same time. And then over time, okay, Iname, she broke away from Takamonchia, and Takamonchia, okay, is now in a monogamous relationship with Ipionchika, right? And right here now, there's polygyny right there going on, okay, here with Chiami married to Maihu in Iname, right? So this is something, okay, that occurs frequently. Oftentimes, they're changing partners, and we naturally think this has been an adaptive mechanism, and it's something that's probably already had been worked in, okay, to their social organization before contact with mainstream society. But this has definitely helped them rebound, right? And then, of course, they do a lot of divination. They frequently visit the spirit world during the dry season. They adorn themselves here, as you can see, with the down of the king vulture, okay? Their women, okay, kind of dress them up like this so that on the nights of the full moon, they go into these little huts that are made again from the babasu palm. Right there, you see the palm fronds. And while there, they sing, they chant until they get into a particular state, okay, of being, and then they travel and transport themselves to the spirit world where they engage with their ancestors and also spiritual entities in the pantheon, okay, of their belief system. And with that, okay, they divine, okay, to look at what's going to happen in the future, and also, okay, to discuss things, okay, with these spiritual entities and to bestow blessing on their family, right? So this is a really fascinating ceremony that we've witnessed a lot, and we're still learning more about it, right? And the interesting thing is that it's only men who go, okay, into the spirit world. Right? Even though you have lots of egalitarianism in hunting and gathering societies, we also call them foraging societies, okay, in this particular instance, okay, it's only the men who commune with the spirits, but often it's their wives who tell them, okay, call on so-and-so. So what's happening is you have a man who travels to the spirit world. His spirit leaves his body, it stays there in the spirit world, and then he's incorporated by another spirit. He returns to earth and he starts chanting, okay, with his wife and his family, and he's blowing blessings on them, like taking us back to a creation myth, if you will, right? Blowing blessings on them, then he goes back into the hut, transports himself again to the spirit world, and he gains his spirit back, okay? But sometimes, okay, his wife asks him to call on another spirit to come back so that they can have another discussion about, okay, good luck in hunting, okay, and curing practices in the future. All right, so what are some of the prospects and challenges ahead of us? Okay, I showed you, okay, another map of this region here, but this is a better one, right? And we're trying to create this buffer zone. This is something we've worked with all of the indigenous peoples in the area right here. This includes, okay, their neighbors, the Guajajara, the Kapo, plus, okay, this adjacent biological reserve here. And, okay, some other, okay, indigenous groups also want to come into the fold here, but this would definitely, okay, once established through Brazil's Ministry of the Environment, an extra added layer of protection, okay, to keep, okay, the advancing frontier from moving in there. So this would provide naturally more funds for the forest guardians, more funds for them, okay, to manage their forests too, and to also recover many degraded areas which have succumbed to many of the land invasions that they have here. This would create more patrolling units for them, right? But the current political situation in Brazil right now has stalled this project of ours because they're not too friendly towards indigenous people. Okay, the whole idea is, full speed ahead. We definitely need to, establish position in the Amazon. Okay, we need to use the Amazon, okay, for all of its resources. But the nice thing about Brazil is that, okay, about 13% of its land area, we're talking about a country about the size of the US, right? It's bigger than the continental US if we exclude Alaska and Hawaii, right? 13% of Brazil's land area, okay, are indigenous reservations, right? And then, of course, that, not to mention all of these biological reserves, what they call conservation units in Brazil. So these are areas that are really critical, okay, to maintaining, okay, the Amazon forest intact, make sure, okay, it doesn't get degraded. At this day and age, we know we're talking about everything, okay, from deforestation to climate change, and all of this has to go into this particular equation. Also, okay, back in the early 1990s, Brazil, through a no-bid contract, scored this project, okay, with the Raytheon Corporation to establish, okay, a communications network so that they can do lots of surveillance in the Amazon, because there's lots of illicit activities going on. Right? There, everything from illegal gold mining, deforestation, so forth, and drug trafficking. You have something like over 3,000 clandestine airstrips in the Amazon. So they had to establish this project right here, but it wasn't done too democratically. And the military, Brazilian military, okay, they're the gatekeepers of this project right here. But okay, the spin-off byproduct of this project here is that at least, okay, we have an enhanced communication networks in an area that's larger than Western Europe, which is much needed so that we can definitely patrol what's going on, and so that the indigenous peoples, okay, get to have, okay, this chance to communicate, okay, with the outside world, to report on these types of activities. Right? And of course, there's been some mobilizations. Okay, here's a picture of some of the forest guardians, the neighboring forest guardians from the neighboring tribe, the Guajajara. Right? This is to help protect and monitor their land. Okay? But there's been still lots of conflicts. Okay, this is not an easy task, okay, for them to do, because you have local politicians who have actually encouraged people to invade, okay, indigenous land areas. And sometimes it's a tense, very tense situation, and regularly we're hearing news, okay, of deaths, okay, from indigenous peoples by people who have ambushed them. Right? But there's been political mobilizations too. The Awa have had very good people that they've worked with in the early days of contact. Okay, you had some rough and heavy-handed Indian agents who weren't really polite with them in any way, shape, or form. But things have improved, especially during the government, okay, of the Workers' Party or Lula, okay, when Lula was in power, Lula and Dilma Rousseff. Right? So they've improved the Indian service. They put a lot more educated people working in there, people with college degrees, to help, okay, them advocate for their rights. Of course, the big elephant in the room here is COVID right now. And luckily, all of the Awa, they got vaccinated. Okay, they had both the first and second round of a vaccination from the Butantan Institute, which partnered with China. And Brazil is also importing vaccinations from Oxford. I can't remember the name of the company. There's some of you may remember right now offhand the name of that company. And then they're going to be importing also from Pfizer, if I'm not mistaken. So the situation is pretty bad in Brazil right now. As we speak, okay, Brazil is only second to the US in terms of the number of deaths from COVID, right? I think in terms of the numbers, okay, people infected with COVID, I think it's India, but Brazil is number 2 in the world. But luckily, in spite of all the crazy things that are going on down in Brazil right now, indigenous peoples were, okay, a priority group to get, okay, the first vaccinations in this first rollout. So I'm going to leave it right there. I don't think I have any more slides to show today.
My goodness, you've given us so much interesting information, and I see that we have quite a few questions here.
Okay, good question. I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of about 50 years, but most groups don't let it take that long, because when you jump from one area to another, okay, sometimes it's easier, okay, to work on a fallow field that's, say, maybe just 15 years old. It's because it's easier to chop down, to replant on that particular area there. But it depends on the different areas of the Amazon. Remember, that's a distinct area right there, the eastern fringes, and that's like, again, what we call the seasonally dry tropical forest. But I'd say somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 years for it to get back to a climax for us in that particular region right there. But there's lots of fallow fields there. And the nice thing is that people sometimes just like to leave them fallow, okay? Leave them fallow because there's so many resources that these become big game hunting areas, because what's left behind in these fallow fields are lots of fruit and crops, right? They don't use them all, okay? So that attracts a lot of game animals and they become big hunting zones. And the wrong-headed takeaway assumption there is that the indigenous peoples are abandoning their fields. They're not abandoning their fields, okay? This is a form of management. Yeah, that's where we're working on researchers. It's mostly in the area of research that this is being done. And these are projects that we are partnering in with indigenous and traditional communities of the Amazon right there. Sometimes you have lumber companies who are actually working in this area, even though the lumber companies are considered like villains. We have international lumber companies like Robinson, okay, Forestry Company and so forth, saying that, well, a standing forest, okay, is our best friend, okay, so that's double talk right there. But it's mostly research, and this is a new area of research that's only come about, say, within the last 30 years, especially dealing with looking at anthropogenic areas. Because before, everybody thought that indigenous peoples didn't know, okay, what to do, that they were just adapting and responding. But as more studies came in, we found out that they actually know what they're doing. Matter of fact, when you have the new projects for settling the Amazon, like these homesteading projects and the Trans-Amazon Highway, they brought in a lot of people from southern Brazil to settle that region right there. And they also gave land to the local people, the local peasant groups, the caboclos. An interesting thing, the people from southern Brazil didn't know how to manage the forest, but the locals did. They knew exactly which areas of land, okay, to manage, and they were teaching the newly arrived newcomers right there how to manage the forest, okay, which tracts of land you should chop down, okay, to create these plots and so on. So their knowledge got incorporated, okay, into these projects, right? So that's how it's pretty much is working. The Brazilian government, okay, did until this current administration under the President Jair Bolsonaro, okay, was working actually on this sustainable forestry in certain areas right there, and still debating that question, like I was mentioning to you, preservation or conservation, right? Okay, the big move right now is conservation because people need to use the forest naturally, but how do you do it? So lots of this, we're trying to work a lot on incorporating indigenous knowledge into this whole scheme. So hopefully it will work, and we think that somewhere in the neighborhood of about 12% of the Amazon is actually anthropogenic forest that was created by indigenous peoples in the past. And these are pretty productive areas, everything from Brazil nut groves to babaçu palm forest to bamboo stands and so on. So there's a lot to learn right there. And then my former wife, she works with medicinal plants, for example. So there's a lot to learn, okay, from indigenous peoples. And naturally, this takes you into another area, right, where you have to definitely have a lot of sensitivity and a lot of care for. This takes you into patent rights, because lots of the knowledge that's learned from, for example, shamans in the Amazon, okay, that's private knowledge, and sometimes you see big pharma going in there, right, absconding with this knowledge and then making windfall profits, okay, from things that they learn. And there's been a few court cases where indigenous peoples have actually taken these big guys to court and won. You know, like for example, the folk, Peruvian shamans, okay, on ayahuasca, for example, okay, or the San, okay, and Kun, okay, from Southern Africa have also taken big pharma to court and won. But those are a few cases right there. So this all has to be very managed, very controlled. And of course, we all know at this day and age, any type of project that we submit has to go through internal review boards at our own university. And I have to jump through two hoops. I have to jump through my own internal review board at UNR, and then I have to jump through other hoops in Brazil because they have their own internal review boards there too. Great question. There is to some degree, yeah. It works both ways, but I'd say they're a lot more Zen than we are on that particular score right there. There's a lot, and this whole issue of polyandry has been written about by a lot by anthropologists, and it occurs for different regions in different parts of the world, right? So as far as we know, I think only 2% of the societies in the world have polyandry. If you go, for example, to the Himalayan region, the reason that they have polyandry there is for land inheritance, to keep it within the family, for example, when brothers marry a wife, that kind of thing. In this situation here, we saw, okay, what the reproductive ideology was like, but also we saw something was used, at least that's what we're speculating, for the recovery of populations and so on. But there has been, some instances of abuse that we have actually witnessed too. But I think from what I have gathered so far, I think the Awa women are very privileged, and most hunting and gathering societies, we've actually changed the term at this day and age in anthropology. In some anthropological circles, it's more politically correct to call them gathering and hunting societies. And the reason for that is because in many of the biodiverse regions of the world, what's going on is this. Women and children are actually bringing in more chow than the men are. Even the best of hunters can only bag a catch maybe once or twice a week. And even though he likes to be boastful and everything, pound his chest, look what I caught here, like that, people knock him down a few notches. And then women are bringing in that much more, calories. But and actually this is from gathered products, right? Yeah. Right, and so forth like that. So it's an interesting thing. So in a neutral term, of course, would be foragers, if you want to call it. But I think it's a cool term, gatherer-hunter, instead of hunter-gatherers, right? Okay, manioc is more carbohydrate heavy, very carbohydrate heavy. So it's a big starchy crop. So it may not have, the whole full gamut there of everything you need. It has maybe just a faint amount of protein there, but there's been so many debates in this area of nutrition where, it's the protein sparing effect, if you have lots of crops out there, right? But it's more like a fallback food, but it's become the big bread and butter crop right now. And oftentimes when you see this transition from foraging to farming, what you have usually is this broad spectrum diet first, among hunting and gathering peoples, but it all gets funneled into carbohydrate dense stuff, right? So you have a bigger concentration of calories right there, It may not be the most diverse diet in the world, but it's more food security. So that's what people usually go for, in this transition from foraging to farming. We saw this in the past, in the archaeological record, we're seeing it now. Even though it'd be naive for us to say that what you see among the Awa in this transition mimics the Neolithic revolution that happened 10 to 12,000 years ago. But still, we can see, this big funneling towards carbohydrate dense stuff. And actually, what's the consequence of that? Look at the Awa's teeth. They have picture perfect teeth when they come from the forest, right? They're very worn because they have to process the foods in their mouths and all other kinds of stuff. They're staying barely a cavity though, but once they transition to this lifestyle here, anthropologists have written about this, physical anthropologists have written about this a lot, you see the disease load goes up, you see when people transition, from, mobile hunter-gatherer groups to settled farming groups until people learn a little bit about this. But it's a problematic transition period with nothing but carbohydrates, right? And so the teeth right now are not doing too good, the oral health, and there's not much, fiber in the diet as there used to be because, manioc, can really stuff you like that. It doesn't move too well, but it feed you, right? Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting, Brazil's always known, for this hodgepodge of religions and people, right? We practice many syncretic religions, then another $50 word right there for you, syncretic, S-Y-N-C-R-E-T-I-C, syncretic. Where religions, blend, so one kind of accommodates the other. Right there, there's like an interpenetration of cultures, and so if you're the weaker party, naturally what you have to do is insinuate your own religion through these new symbols that come and are presented to you. And that's what happened, you see in lots of Afro-Brazilian cults. Okay, you go to like Bahia, or Salvador, Bahia, where I lived in there. And they kind of like align their African gods and goddesses with the pantheon of Catholic saints, right? So I was born on February 2nd, for example, the day of Iemanjá, the sea goddess, also called Saint Barbara, right? So she gains new qualities and attributes as a process in this particular process right there. In terms of the Awa, one of the villages has been influenced by that one fellow right there, okay? And you see them saying the Lord's Prayer and everything. They got Facebook now and everything. Sometimes they're saying, oh, thank the good Lord that here I'm alive and doing well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And may I have good luck and love and hunting and these kinds of things, right? And so, yeah, it's become a big thing. And it's been problematic, however, because these evangelical groups, sometimes they spread a lot of false news now that, we have COVID. Some of them are saying, through the social media and stuff like that, hey, you have to submit to the will of God. You have to submit to the will of the Almighty, okay? You never know, okay, what's in that vaccine. They're putting a chip in the vaccine. So we had to intercept that really quickly, okay? But luckily the Awa are in good hands right now with the folks that we're working with. And they've all been vaccinated, So as for the other group, okay, the CIMI, the Conselho Indigenista Missionário, okay, they're lay missionaries. It's more like teaching people global citizenship, politics, okay, how to advocate for themselves and so forth. Not that I'm demeaning the other guy too much, because he actually is a nice guy. We actually talk about religion, and things like that. But he wants to preach the word, that's his deal. Right? Yeah. I haven't gone to the spirit world. They've invited me to go, but But I just asked him, okay, what went on? I asked him, what did you see? Who did you engage with, and so on. And the men like to talk about this a lot. And the people who have been in contact longer, who were orphaned at an early age, and came into contact, were raised more like at the Indian outposts, they're very cynical about that, right? And they think that they're all lying, right? But, well, that happens with us too, right? We have true believers, okay? We have true believers who believe, for example, that Mary was a virgin, right? That kind of thing. Then you have people in our own religion who are raised Catholic, Protestant, or whatever, are cynical about their own religions, right? Those type of things. But to better answer your question about being a participant observer, yeah, we all go through culture shock naturally, right? So there's days on end, okay, naturally, okay, you feel like a lump on the log until you definitely are able to integrate yourself. But anthropologists, okay, in theory, we try to train ourselves ahead of time to expect that, right? Knowing that there's times that you're going to be lonely, you're not going to be able to talk to anybody. But my strategies was always playing with the kids first, right? Just engaging with the kids. And the kids, they don't worry about faux pas or anything like that. But look at him, look the way he dressed, look the way he eats. Oh my God, look at his habits and so forth. So I started learning from then, okay, what would be appropriate behavior. And then eventually I was able to engage more with the adults after I learned the language from the kids, right? So, because naturally you can't cut into people's time. If these people are, okay, minding their crops, if they're hunting, if they're fishing, okay, you're cutting into their livelihoods. So you have to know how to time things very well. And of course, have to know how to approach things. We're not the type of people you sit down and say, let's sit down and let's have an interview, okay, like that. They can't stand that for more than 20 minutes. It bores the hell out of them, and they'll just get up and leave. So you have to do it on the fly, right? As you're walking through the forest, you have to be talking and recording and jotting this stuff down and all that, right? You'll put them to sleep, okay, if you do the things that we like to do and sit people down in an air-conditioned room and a desk right there and start asking them a bunch of questions, right? So sometimes you have to work, okay, with interlocutors. You have to do it indirectly too, to continue the conversation at a later date, right? And of course, okay, you go through a different cycle of the day altogether, okay? You're up at sunup, okay? You're sleeping there and chanting, okay, in your hammock, okay, with them at sundown, okay? It's a different biological cycle altogether, right? But my whole life's been like that, to tell you the truth, because my dad was in the Air Force, my mom was Brazilian, so I grew up in 4 different countries, right? So I kind of was accustomed to that, but this was a unique experience for sure. Yeah, so yeah, we could talk plenty. And I teach an ethnographic field methods course, so if anybody's interested, I'm teaching it next fall. Oh God, I was hoping somebody would ask that question. Yeah.
Must have
Well,
sensed that.
Yeah, we just to stay in touch and tune and with us. As you know, one of the big questions always is money. We're always looking for resources. So if you let us know about the availability of resources, because I'm always hunting down funds for research and community development, both here and in Brazil. And then also you can, there's NGOs that could definitely do with contributions, you know, that work with indigenous peoples in Brazil and so on. And then also helping us in this whole campaign of truth, right? Okay, because we know we live in a very fragmented landscape at this day and age. Once the internet went to the wing, we were all celebrating it as a big information highway, but look what's going on at this day and age, right? Mm-hmm. And we all know that, right? So it's just to keep people, okay, on track, okay, with good sources of information, okay, to consult us. And then, you know, once restrictions get lifted, you know, definitely I wouldn't mind if somebody would like to tag along with me and get to visit them. No problem, as long as you'd like to contribute something, right? All right, well, that region of the country doesn't have a big life expectancy. The indigenous peoples actually are better off because they are being taken care of by government assistance programs. And you have both the Indian agency there working, okay, side by side with the Brazilian National Health Foundation, which has a special section just for indigenous peoples. So like I showed you in that last slide right there, in that last slide, they were first, okay, to get vaccinated, right? That really blew me away. I was so pleased to see that indigenous peoples had priority along with the elderly and health workers to get vaccinated, right? The people who live in the surrounding areas, those are dirt poor people. And sometimes you can't blame them for poaching on their land because they're dirt poor. Sometimes you see people walking onto an Indian reservation, but going through the normal route, not sneaking, you know, through a back route trail or anything like that. Just going right up to the outpost and saying, look, do you have any medicines? My wife is sick. Kind of thing. And then the Indians gladly oblige, okay, if you do that, if you approach them that way, they have, you know, there are dispensaries right there along with the health professionals. These are nurses, of course, they're no doctors. Or sometimes you have ambulatory crews which go into the area taking care of everything from dentistry just to general physical, you know, examinations and things like that. But no, if you do it the good way, you know, they don't mind, you know, sharing their medicines with you. But the life expectancy is lower there. Yeah, and if you go to the urban regions of Brazil and stuff like that, the life expectancy is big. But that's an area of the country that's hard hit, and so you have to look at it this way: there are no good guys and bad guys out there, because the people that live in the surrounding part, right there, they need to be taken care of, and that's one of our goals. Okay, with this big buffer zone, it's called the Gurupi mosaic, right there. It's to also to accommodate these people, make sure that they're taken care of, because if they're taken care of, they're not going to bother, okay, the indigenous peoples. Yeah, our department's very open to it, our anthropology department, you know, and for people who want to continue their studies, in our department or go on to do graduate work. Yeah, we've been very accommodating. We have, as a matter of fact, a number of people who've always come over from TMCC, which to transition to UNR, and for most definitely. So you have my contact, and definitely, can answer all the emails for you as best as I can.
Well, Louis, thank you so much. This was so informative. My goodness, a whole other world to learn about, and so much important information, as you said, in the world we're all inhabiting, and we know there's so much out there. So you're helping us to how we approach learning about what is going on in that part of the world. And it's vitally important, as we know from the news, the importance of the Amazon in so many ways. So thank you so much for being a speaker for our college. It was fascinating, and I would like to join with everyone and thank you for being our wonderful speaker for this semester, and thank you so very much, and everybody who attended, and we'll be in touch, and
Okay.
we have some ideas for the future. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for Dr. Hilgerson. Thank you for everyone.
Okay.
Lovely.
Thank you, everybody, for coming too. Thanks a million.
Thank you. It was really interesting. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.